Okay, settle in. We are going deep tonight on the brand new English Housing Survey. I mean, this is it. This is the foundational document, the source code that pretty much all housing policy is built on. And when you first look at it, the big headline numbers, they look almost suspiciously stable. Yeah, exactly. And that's the illusion. That's the trap. On the surface, it all looks fine, rock solid. But the second you start looking at the bedrock of data underneath, you see these massive structural tensions. This isn't just a market report. What this is a story about a country that is quietly cracking apart, and the fault lines, they start right here, in our homes.
So let's start with that big headline number, the one you're going to see everywhere. 65%. 65% of all households in England are owner-occupied. We're talking 16.25 million homes. And the key detail here, the thing they want you to notice, is that this number has been incredibly stable. It's pretty much the same as it was right before the pandemic. And that's the picture they want you to see, isn't it? This big, solid majority, this shield of stability. It's all designed to feel incredibly reassuring. But believe me, that single number is doing a ton of heavy lifting to hide what's actually going on underneath.
I mean, it's not just reassuring, it's deeply misleading. That 65% is a facade. It's an illusion. I want you to picture a huge, frozen lake in the middle of winter. From a distance, it looks completely solid, totally safe, right? But we all know that just underneath that thin surface of ice, there are these powerful invisible currents moving in completely opposite directions, and deep fractures are forming where you can't see them. Well, that 65%, that's just the frozen surface. Tonight, we're drilling through it. We're going to look at the dangerous currents moving right underneath.
Exactly. And to really understand those fractures, we first have to appreciate how this stable facade was even built in the first place. Because this stability, it's not an accident. It's the end result of a wild two-decade story of boom, bust, and a really strange lopsided recovery.
Right.
So let's just go to the first section of the report itself and actually trace that path. Let's look at the data.
Okay, so let's just walk through this timeline. If you rewind all the way back to 2003, we were at the absolute peak, 71% owner occupation. Then, of course, the financial crisis hits, and for a solid decade, it's just a downward slide. It finally bottoms out at 63% in 2013-14. And since then, we've had this really slow, painful climb back. It finally hit 65% just before the pandemic, and it has been frozen there ever since. And that right there is the crucial point for me. We are on a plateau, not a peak. We've managed to recover from the floor, but we are nowhere near the heights we were once at. It's like we're celebrating stability, but it's the stability of climbing out of a hole just to stand on the curb. It's not the stability of standing on a mountaintop.
And that plateau is everything. Look, the stability of the number is real. It hasn't budged. But the composition of who is inside that 65% has been completely transformed. It's sort of like a company that boasts about having the same number of employees year after year. But what they don't tell you is that half of their experienced senior staff have retired and they've been replaced by unpaid interns on 6-month contracts. The headcount is the same, sure, but the internal stability, the security, the future of that company, it's a totally different and much, much more fragile story. That's exactly what's happened to homeownership in England.
Precisely. And this brings us to the absolute core revelation of the entire survey, what we see right here in Section 2. That 65% isn't one big happy family. It's two completely distinct, diverging tribes. On one side, you have the people who own their home outright. No mortgage, totally paid off. And on the other, you have the people who are still buying with a mortgage. And the balance of power between those two groups has radically shifted.
And this slide, this just shows the data in black and white. Let's really focus on these numbers for a second. A decade ago, back in 2013-14, the two groups were almost perfectly balanced. You had 33% owning outright and 31% with a mortgage. That's a tiny 2-point gap. Okay, now fast forward to today. The outright owners have grown to 36%, while the mortgagors have actually shrunk to 29%. So that little gap, it has exploded from 2 points to 7. And this is not a minor shift. This is a definitive structural reweighting of the entire housing market. This is the earthquake happening right underneath that frozen lake we were talking about.
And this quote on the slide, this is the key. This is about so much more than numbers. The report has this amazing name for it. They call it the Geriatric Accumulation Thesis, and we are watching it play out in real time. I want you to picture the housing market as two escalators, side by side in some big shopping mall. One is the outright owner escalator. It's full of an older, asset-rich generation. Their escalator is just moving smoothly, steadily upwards. They're insulated from any shocks. Then right next to it, you have the mortgagor escalator. This one is for the younger generation. It's rickety, it's overcrowded, it keeps shuttering to a halt. The first step is so high you practically have to take a running jump just to get on. They're in the same building, but they are having two completely different experiences, and those escalators are moving further and further apart. The housing market isn't one thing anymore. It's two separate worlds, defined entirely by age and by debt.
So, let's actually dig into the profiles of the people on those two escalators using the data from this table. First, the outright owners. It's an older group, for sure. A staggering 62% are 65 or over. They're financially resilient. 83% have savings. And crucially, they're completely shielded from interest rate exposure. Now, let's look at the other side, the first-time buyers. Their average age is 34. A good number have savings, 73%, but they are directly and completely exposed to any and all rate fluctuations. It's just two different universes. One group has already reached the destination, they're safe and sound. The other is just starting a very long, very precarious journey, and the weather is turning bad.
And this next slide, this shows the mechanism. This is the one trick that allows young people to even get on that broken escalator in the first place. This is the price of admission to the housing market in 2025. 62%, that's nearly 2/3 of all first-time buyers are now taking on a mortgage with a term of 30 years or longer. And just look at the trend line here. Only 5 years ago, that figure was just 47%. That's not some gradual shift. That's a rapid, systemic, and frankly, terrifying change in the fundamental nature of how we finance a home in this country.
And this is the central tension of the entire modern market, and it's illustrated perfectly right here. We haven't fixed the affordability crisis by making houses cheaper or by raising wages in any meaningful way. No, we've just found this invisible, almost genius workaround. We've stretched time. The report uses this incredible phrase for it, temporal stretching. To make the monthly payments seem affordable, we've just kicked the can down a much, much longer road. A 30 or 35-year mortgage used to be a niche option for a few people. Now, it's the standard ticket price. You are literally borrowing from your 60-year-old self to pay for a house in your 30s. And this isn't just a financial decision, it's practically a life sentence. It dictates your career choices, your ability to take risks, when or even if you can retire. The market has solved for the problem of cost by weaponizing time, and the consequences of that are going to ripple through our society for decades to come.
So, if just getting on the homeownership escalator requires you to sign away 30 or 40 years of your life, what happens to all the people who can't or simply won't do that? Well, that brings us to the next section of the report, the renter's burden. And we're talking about 19% of all households here. That's nearly 5 million families. And what the data shows very clearly is that the pressures in the ownership market are creating this brutal ripple effect that is squeezing renters like never before.
And this chart, this just lays the reality bare. It's brutal. Let's just look at the two bars. For people with a mortgage, their payments eat up, on average, 19% of their income, okay? Now look at the private renters. Their rent consumes a staggering 39% of their income. It's more than double the burden. And that's usually on a much lower average income to begin with. This isn't a gap, it's a chasm. It's just fundamentally unfair. And that chasm exists for a simple mechanical reason that's kind of hidden in this very dense quote you see on the slide. The market is successfully transmitting higher cost structures onto the consumer base. What that actually means, in plain English, is that the rental market is a perfect conductor of pain. When a landlord's mortgage costs go up, they don't absorb that pain. Of course not. They transmit it. They pass it directly through the system until it lands squarely on the tenant in the form of higher rent. The renter has become the final human shock absorber for the entire financial system. They bear the brunt of every single economic decision, with absolutely no escape.
And this slide, this shows the human result of all that cost transmission. The data is crystal clear. Nearly 1/3, 32% of private renters, now say they find it difficult or very difficult to pay their rent. And that's up from 27% just before the pandemic. I mean, this isn't just a statistic. This is a measure of widespread, growing anxiety. It means millions of families are living in a constant state of low-grade panic, just worrying about being able to afford the roof over their heads.
And this leads us to the final, and for me, the most profound section of this entire report. Because this story isn't just about money and spreadsheets and debt. The survey also measures something much, much deeper: our well-being, our happiness, our anxiety. And what it reveals is that the financial fractures in the housing market are now creating a deep psychological toll on the entire country.
This is the great paradox that the data reveals. For most of us, the physical structures we live in, they're secure, we have a roof over our heads,
But the person inside that house, their mind is a mess. We, the people, are feeling less secure, less satisfied, and more anxious than ever before. The pandemic didn't just change our work habits. It seems to have fundamentally broken our relationship with the very idea of what home is supposed to feel like.
Okay, let's look at the specific data points from the Office for National Statistics, laid out right here. Before the pandemic, national life satisfaction was at a 7.7 out of 10. Today, it has fallen to 7.5. At the same time, the national anxiety level has ticked up from a 2.7 to a 2.9. Now, these might seem like small shifts, but on a national scale, they are huge. We are measurably, significantly less happy and more anxious. And this trend is seen across all types of housing. Everyone is feeling it.
But while that decline in well-being is widespread, it is definitely not evenly distributed. And this next number is, for my money, the single most shocking statistic in the entire report. Within the social rented sector, an incredible 61% of households now contain someone with a long-term illness or disability. That's a huge jump from 54% just before the pandemic. That is deeply, deeply concerning. It points to this profound concentration of vulnerability and suffering in one specific part of our housing system. It's almost becoming a silo for the unwell.
So when you put it all together, the picture on this slide, it says it all. The housing market isn't a ladder anymore that people can climb. It's more like a series of separate, isolated islands. You've got the lush, green island of the outright owners. They are financially secure, they're resilient. Then you've got the island of the mortgagers, who are chained to 30 years of debt just to stay on their little patch of land. You've got the island of the private renters, who are constantly being battered by storms of rising costs. And then you have this other island for social renters that is becoming increasingly isolated, unhealthy, and unhappy. The market hasn't just created inequality. It has physically cleaved our society into 4 separate tribes that are living totally different lives.
And this brings us to the final section, and the final, unavoidable question. We've seen all the data. It's a system built on a deceptive top-line number, a system that works by dividing generations and passing all the costs down to the most vulnerable, a system that only functions by stretching debt into the distant future. How long can a society built on these deep, structural tensions truly sustain itself?
This is the question that just hangs over every single page of this report. The market's solution to the crisis of cost has been to borrow from the future, through longer mortgages, through deferred dreams, and through diminished well-being. It is a system that is propped up entirely on borrowed time. And that leaves us with the single most critical question of all, the one this slide asks. For an entire generation and for the country as a whole, what happens when time finally runs out?